Hey guys, it's Superior and welcome to C++ tutorial number 25. Today we're going to be looking at function parameters. So in the previous tutorial we talked about scope, and basically scope is where every function has its own pen, so to speak, of its own pen, and we could say each variable in that pen is one sheep. I think that's the singular of sheep. One sheep, yeah. Anyway, so the sheep are the variables. Okay. So there is actually a way we can not transfer, but copy those sheep from one pen and put them into another pen, and we do this using what are called parameters. Okay. So here we can see already we've got two functions. One says output message, one says output xy, and already we notice a difference from the functions we've been using before. We can see there is actually something between the parentheses. Okay. Now everything between the parentheses is called a parameter, and when we call the function we have to supply the parameters. We won't get on to calling functions just quite yet though, because I want to explain defining the parameters. Basically, when we define parameters, we need to think of what the function is going to need from the main function, from the main program, or actually not necessarily from the main program, from wherever, what the function actually needs from somewhere else that it can't get itself to work. So in the case of output message, let's take a look at the definition. We can see it's trying to output my message. So what the output message function needs is a string called my message. So there are two ways we can define the parameters. The first way, in a function prototype that is, the first way is where we just type the type of the parameter, we don't type a name, and then the second way is where we type the type of the parameter and the name. Now if you type so yeah, actually, yeah, that's all I need to say about that. What's important to know is that in the definition you always put the name though. In the prototype you don't have to put the name, although it's a good idea to. So actually I'm just going to put that in there just for the sake. I've shown you what it would look like without the name in there, but it's a good idea to put that in the prototype as well. Now remember how we talked about the function prototype has to be exactly the same as the definition. Well, the name here has to be exactly the same as the name here, and so does the type. This type has to be exactly the same as this type. And the parameters have to be ordered, so I can't say in x in y here and then say in y in x here. It wouldn't work. Maybe you don't understand how the parameters are working at the moment, so I'm just going to show you how we work with functions that need parameters. Actually, if I go, not that one, it was, no, this one, yes, this one. If I go back to tutorial number 22, let me just uncomment it. We can see here we have functions here. This function find, it's a function, and it's taking two parameters here. Okay, so we've already actually sort of delved in parameters. We just didn't really realize it, if you know what I mean. So oh, and just as an explanation, basically in the find function requires the substring to find and the offset of where you want to start looking from. That's a good example of parameters. In our case, the output message function requires the message you want to output. Now there are two ways of supplying these values. we can either supply them literally, like we're doing here. In this case, we're typing out, we're calling the function like usual, except we're putting in the argument. I'll talk about that in a sec, why it's called an argument. We're putting the argument in between the parentheses, and instead of passing a variable in, like we're doing here, we're passing a string literal. Rather than a string literal stored inside a variable, was just passing a straight string literal like that. So that works. You can do that. Alternatively, as I've just been talking about, is you can store a value in a variable and then just pass the variable. Okay. Now, I used the word arguments when I talked about calling the function here. The thing is, when you write the function, the things it needs, so these things, are called parameters, but when you call the function, the things you supply are arguments. So what the function requires, parameters, what you give the function are arguments, okay? So basically they're the same thing, there's just a different name depending on whether you're making the function or whether you're calling the function, if you see what I mean. So let's try and make a hypothesis of what this is going to output. Let's take a look at the output message function again. It's just simply outputting the variable myMessage, which we should be passing into it. If we don't pass it, if we don't pass a value into the function won't work. We'll get a compile error. So basically, we're just outputting the message we were supplied, and then a simple line break. So here, in this case, it should just output "Hello World!" exclamation mark, and then line break. And in this case, it should just output another message at exclamation point, and then a line break, or a character return, whatever you want to call it. So let's give that a go. Okay, and as expected, hello world, character return, another message, character return. Okay. Now, we've also got another function which actually does the same thing. But this one is taking in integers rather than strings. So that's the output xy value. All it does is outputs x, puts a comma, then outputs y, full stop, and a line break. So, and it takes two parameters, or sorry, no, actually it takes two arguments in this case, because when we say it takes, we're calling it. Okay, so it takes two arguments. It takes the x argument and the y argument. Now, here's an example of calling with just the raw values, so we're just supplying 1 and 2. And again, here's an example of supplying it with variable values. Okay, and this goes back to the problem we had in the previous tutorial where we were trying to output x, but it was saying undeclared identifier x. Okay, if we pass the value into the function using arguments and parameters, you know what I mean. Then we can output x successfully. So let's give that a shot. The first one with the literal values gives 1, 2, and the second one with the variable values gives 5, 6, as expected. Now, actually I don't want to talk about that just now. Basically, that's pretty much it for this tutorial, I guess. Anyone has any questions about parameters, give me a ring. Oh, not a ring. Leave a comment, send a message, send a contact form. And just so you know, experiment with parameters. Because you gotta get comfortable with parameters. You're gonna be using functions all the time in C++, and if you don't understand how they work, it's gonna be a lot harder for you. Okay, so yeah. If you have any questions, like I said, over and out, guys.